Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Health Talks podcast, a platform where we highlight the unique journeys of leaders in science and healthcare. Now, today, we have a very special guest joining us on the podcast. She is genuinely one of the most amazing human beings you will ever come across, and has dedicated her career to giving children the most powerful tool any of us can have, and that is the ability to communicate. Without further ado, allow me to introduce Teresa Varrasso, Speech and Language Pathologist with the Durham Catholic District School Board. Teresa, how are you? How's your summer been so far?
Oh, it's been great, thanks.
What
How are
have
you doing?
Oh, not bad, keeping busy with the podcast, obviously, and working, but what have you got up to?
This summer, we did some camping, visited one of our daughters who's here in Ottawa, went to near Mont Tremblant to do some hiking, and then just lots of stuff around the house.
You have a daughter moving in or starting university now. That
Yeah.
must be an exciting time.
Yeah, it is very exciting. It's very exciting.
Okay. So before we dive into what a speech and language pathologist does and learn, of course, a little bit more about your career, let's start by getting to know you, the person. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm originally from Hamilton. And went to school here at Ottawa U and then at University of British Columbia afterwards, and then moved back to Ontario just to be closer to my family and started my career as a speech-language pathologist. Right now I am living in Bowmanville where my husband grew up. And as you said, we have two daughters. They are no longer living with us, but we also have two dogs that keep us occupied. And my husband's mom lives with us as well.
Okay. You guys are empty nesters now.
Yeah, I'm really grateful we have the dogs not to distract us from the quietness.
Yeah. So I'll get to my first question now. So we're on campus in speaking to students exploring careers in healthcare. I've noticed speech and language pathology often doesn't get the recognition it deserves compared to the other, you could say, magazine cover professions in healthcare. For our audience who may not fully understand the scope of your work, could you walk us through what exactly a speech and language pathologist does?
Yeah, so we actually have a really large scope of practice, so much so that you end up specializing to a certain extent. So if you're working with adults, communication is our main focus, but there's also other areas that we help people with. So if you're working with adults, you're often helping with feeding and swallowing rehabilitation following a stroke or a brain injury. And you're also helping with communication rehabilitation following a stroke or brain injury. And sometimes voice disorders will occur after a stroke or brain injury. And so a person working in adult rehab who's a speech-language pathologist is taking care of or helping in all those areas. And then in pediatrics, it is the same. We cover the same areas, but you're looking at more focus on communication, generally speaking. So when I talk about communication, I don't just mean talking. You're thinking about how a person understands when somebody's speaking to them, what their social communication is like. Are they in tune to other people when they're talking to them? And then we also focus in on their actual language that they're using. So can they formulate sentences properly? Do they have enough vocabulary or words to do that? And then how does their speech sound? Are their sounds accurate? Are they using the sounds that they should be for their age? So it's really quite a large scope of practice. When you work in pediatrics, you can also be helping with feeding and swallowing as a speech-language pathologist. But it's not always the focus depending on what setting you're in. So it really is quite a vast field. There's lots of things you can do when you're a speech-language pathologist, and that was one of the things that appealed to me. I found myself sometimes, not liking to do the same thing over and over again and wanting to be learning new things, and I felt like it was a profession where I would be able to do that as I continued on in it.
Yeah, no, I feel like the variety of clients that you work with different needs, different communication impairments. most of the clients you work with, are these communication disabilities that they're born with, or that they've developed through an injury or whatnot?
A lot of the clients that, or students that I work with, or clients that I worked with in the past when I was working with preschoolers, it was more developmental in nature. So they weren't necessarily, there wasn't necessarily a challenge that would be with them for life, but they were born with a delay in their speaking or a difference in how they were understanding or using language. And then you do have some children where there is a communication difficulty resulting from a brain injury, but that's less common than kids who are presenting with delays.
Hmm. What type of clients would you say are more difficult to work with, or have it takes a longer there's a longer process um,
I
in
think
helping them?
some children present with multiple areas of difficulty. So it's not just that they're difficult to understand, like their speech sounds may be delayed, but they're also delayed in their vocabulary development, or they might have difficulty understanding people when people are talking to them. So the more kind of areas of communication that are impacted, the more challenging that can be. But it doesn't mean that those individuals can't make progress and
Hmm.
develop their communication skills. That's the other thing about working with the younger population. There's brain plasticity, and there's lots of pathways being developed in the brain, and so you can, even though a child is presenting with differences in their communication, you can always help them to expand on how they communicate.
And would you say it's easier working with a child versus an adult, just because, like you said, their brains are still in the developmental stages?
Yeah, to be honest, I worked with adults, but very early in my career, and I
Hmm.
haven't really done a lot in that field in a really long time. So I think a speech pathologist who works with adults may have a different frame of view than I
Hmm.
would. I do feel like, there's always gains with children there, and so you always get to see a shift,
Hmm.
a positive shift, because they're growing and maturing and developing. So that's why I personally feel like it's easier. But there, I did find working with adults very rewarding as well. And even though sometimes the injury, the challenges they have as a result of their brain injury, even though some of that brain damage can be permanent, there is still so much that we have to kind of pull from to help them to communicate more. It can still be very rewarding.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And what's the best part of working with kids?
Oh, there's always a fun element,
Hmm.
right? You of course are helping parents to manage all the feelings they have, knowing that their child is
Hmm.
behind or has struggles. But there's always joy built into your work because you're playing or you know, uh,
It rejuvenates you. It keeps you on your
yeah. Oh,
toes.
it really does. I 100% believe that I have more youthfulness because I work with children.
Awesome. So you spent time working at a pediatric rehabilitation center called Grandview Kids before moving into your current role with the Durham Catholic District School Board. What prompted you to make that decision, to make the switch? And from your perspective, what have been the biggest differences between working in a pediatric rehabilitation setting versus supporting students in a school setting as an SLP?
So they're two very different roles, but I feel like there's kind of like a main theme that followed me from my work at Grandview to the board. When you're working in the pediatric setting with families and kids, that's really your focus, helping the family to learn communication strategies, helping the child to develop their communication. It's very focused on the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you move to a school board setting, the family unit changes. So you're more working for the school team. You're trying to help the school team to facilitate communication from a student and also to help them understand the student's challenges and how they learn differently. So the helping piece doesn't change. You're just helping a different group of people.
Mm-hmm.
It is a little bit different in terms of my role at the board. Our board, because of how the services are set up, we aren't able to provide any therapy. Whereas when I worked at Grandview Kids, I was providing speech language therapy to children. So it's a little bit different because I'm mainly doing assessments and
Hmm.
providing consultation and giving strategies, but not doing direct therapy. So that would be the main difference.
Okay.
The reason I shifted was mainly just because I was feeling a little bit complacent. I had been working with kids around the age of 5 and under for over 20 years, and I was feeling like even though I loved many things about what I was doing, I wanted to force myself to make a change and learn some new things. And it's been really rewarding. I'm really glad that I made the shift. I miss a lot of things about working with little ones, but I still get to work in kindergarten classrooms.
Hmm.
So I don't feel like I'm missing too much. And it has been really good to get out and see what happens to these little people once they start school and start to have to learn to read and expand their knowledge beyond just me helping them with their talking and their pronunciation.
Hmm. And you see their growth over time too.
That's right. That's right. And you see how they manage. In the preschool setting, I was in a room with them and their parents. It's kind of artificial. It was very artificial, actually. So to see them in an everyday setting like a school and see how they're managing and see how their communication challenges present themselves, and it does give you a wider view of kind of what's happening and how impactful their communication challenges can be.
And I feel like too, there's a little bit more of an informed assessment that you make because you see what they do on a daily basis outside of that hour or couple hours you have dedicated to them.
That's right. That's right. It is a very it's more of a big picture. It's more of putting a lot of puzzle pieces together as you're assessing them, but it's very interesting to see the difference for sure.
Okay, so throughout your career, um, what when did what was one of the defining moments in your career when you realized that speech and language pathology was truly your calling? You were like, okay, this is what I want to do. I was put on this earth to to help these kids.
I don't know if there was one moment necessarily. I actually discovered speech language pathology when I was much younger, when I was around 12. My cousin's daughter had cerebral palsy, and
Okay.
I babysat his kids a lot.
Hmm.
And I happened to be there one day when her speech pathologist was coming to the home and doing some speech practice with her. And I had never heard of speech language pathology, and I thought, wow, this is a really cool job. Just watching her help my cousin with her sounds and kind of help her to communicate more effectively. And then that kind of started my interest in the field, and it built from there. But there were definitely moments kind of early in my career where I was like, oh, this is something that I think I was meant to do. Like, I do enjoy it, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it. And I think the times that happened most often was when I was facilitating parent workshops.
Okay.
So I ran some parent workshops for parents of children with autism. I ran many workshops for parents of kids who were stuttering.
And when was this?
This was at Grandview Kids.
Oh, this was at
And
Grandview.
actually,
Okay.
previous to that, I worked for 3 years at Kids Ability in Kitchener Waterloo, and I
Okay.
I did start facilitating workshops there. But I really found that I felt like I was giving important information in a way that people could understand it, and they were though that sharing of that information helped them to help their kids with their communication.
And was there any like relevant experience that you got prior to going to school and obviously starting your career?
Well, I was so fortunate that I discovered the career at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
because once I left Hamilton, which is where I was where I was babysitting my cousin Francine and spent a lot of time with her.
Mm-hmm.
When I was here in Ottawa, I took care of a child who needed help after school, who had a developmental disability.
Okay.
And I worked with her after school. And so I just tried to tailor my volunteer experiences to getting more exposure to the career. So I volunteered at CHIO in their speech language pathology department for a short time. And then when I was actually doing my master's out west, I volunteered with one of my professors who was collecting data for kids she was working with. And I just kind of tried to keep those, like, kind of add to my resume in terms of working with people with different challenges. I also volunteered at a number of nursing homes, because when I initially started in the field, or was in graduate school, I thought I wanted to work with adults, and so I volunteered at some nursing homes just to get that experience as well.
Hmm. And you mentioned you pursued a master's in speech and language pathology
Hmm.
at at the University of British Columbia. But your master's wasn't a traditional thesis. Would you be able to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the programs are like now, but our master's program, you could choose a thesis route, or you could choose like a clinical case study route.
Hmm.
And so a lot of the people in my class did the clinical case study. And I just felt like for me that was a better fit. I was, I had been in school for a long time and I was ready to get out
Hmm.
into the field of working. I just wanted to be a clinician. And I didn't really picture myself spending a lot of time doing research and kind of that piece. Sometimes I regret that, but it was a good fit for me doing the clinical case study.
Hmm. Did you sort of figure that out when you volunteered in the lab of your professor, that you didn't sort of like the research aspect to it, to speech and
Um,
language pathology?
I think I was just intimidated, to be honest, like just a little bit intimidated about how much time it would take, and
Hmm.
then also like the specificity of the research. But you're right, I did get a window into that by volunteering in her lab, because we were, just listening to kids say different words
Hmm.
and different sounds over and over again, and then looking at the acoustics of it. And that part was not very appealing to me. And I think I just kind of saw it, even though it would have been a kind of a great path to go on for me, I saw it as something that would delay me from getting out
Hmm.
into the workforce and actually doing the work. And I loved my clinical placements when I was in grad school, and they were the best part of grad school for me. So I just wanted to do more of that, because I really found I learned much more on the job than I did in the classroom.
Okay. And in your work, what would you say is your biggest source of intrinsic motivation? Like, what is it that drives you on a day in and day out basis and reminds you why your work really matters?
I think I just like to help people, and I feel like because I do the job that I do, I always get to help people, or I try to help people.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's, a teacher who's struggling with kind of how to help a child in the
Mm-hmm.
classroom, or if it's, another person in our student services department that's working with a student and they have questions about their communication, it's just that helping piece that I think motivates me
Yeah.
to continue on.
Your personality too. You even just for the audience who doesn't know you, just the way you talk, you're a very caring, like you're a very nurturing person, I find too.
Thanks.
So obviously it's not always rainbows and sunshine, right? Like every career has both rewarding and difficult dimensions to it. And I think that's important for people to recognize that reality when they're sort of figuring out what career they want to go into. What would you say are some of the most challenging aspects of your work? And how do you navigate those difficult situations while still finding great fulfillment in your work?
Well, that's a really good question. I think, anytime you work in the public sector, whether it be for, a rehabilitation center, or for a school board, or for a hospital, there's always constraints around funding and how many people are doing the work that you're doing. And so workload is a really big challenge in our field. You do feel like you always need to be doing, and it's sometimes overwhelming, the
Mm-hmm.
amount of work that you have to do. But I think at the end of the day, you kind of try and break it up into smaller pieces. So, how can, yes, this is a lot of work to do as a whole, but what few things can I do to help a few
Mm-hmm.
people today? And that kind of keeps you going forward. Um, generally there is a theme of understaffing. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
across the medical field, right? Not just speech language pathologists, but just it's good for people to be aware of that. And a lot of speech language pathologists work privately, solely privately,
Do you have
or
private clients on the side?
I have very few private clients. I haven't found that I've really had time
Mm-hmm.
to have like a full private practice, but I do have coworkers who do work solely privately,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a little bit different than working in the public sector. But it is the same work, and you still get to help people, and you still get to, there is still a lot of rewarding parts about being in private practice as well.
For sure. And would you say at Grandview versus the school board, there were a lot more resources at your disposal?
No, I feel like it was pretty even. Yeah, I feel like Grandview was really good for always, providing. We had yearly education that was really very practical and suitable. We had like access to things that we needed, and the school board is similar. The school board has a lot of there's technology there that we didn't have at Grandview because it's not as applicable as it is to the work that we're doing in the school board. So no, I feel like they supported their staff equally, both of those places. Yeah, it's just a little bit different because, at the school board, we need more assessment materials.
Mm-hmm.
We need, and I meant to bring it today, I brought it with me, but I have an augmentative communication device with me.
Oh, cool.
Sorry, not with me, but at the hotel. But anyway, we need those tools in the school board more. I didn't use them as much at Grandview because we didn't have access to them. And
Mm-hmm.
at the school board, we're actually able to help a child kind of learn how to use a communication device. So, for
Mm-hmm.
those of you that don't know what a communication device is, they can vary. Sometimes we just start with a simple board with some pictures on it, and it allows a child who has limited verbal communication or speech to just point to pictures and then communicate more messages. And so, as a child is able to use that board, we will shift often into using an actual device. And usually it's on an iPad and it has an application. So there's different augmentative communication applications. But again, the pictures are set up and the device actually speaks for the child. So they may only be able to say blue, but they can build a sentence that says, I want the blue crayon
Mm-hmm.
using this device.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, so in terms of technology, it's just different because there's different requirements for each place that I worked at.
Mm-hmm. Is there any other tools specifically you use regularly in your therapy?
Well, that would be kind of the main therapy that we do. As I
Mm-hmm.
said, we don't really get to do therapy,
Oh,
but
yes, that's right.
what we do with those devices is train the educational assistants and the teachers that are
Mm-hmm.
working with the student on how to model language using the device. So they see kind of the potential, the kids see the potential for it, and they start to use it more, and it eventually becomes their voice. So those would be the main kind of tools that we use in terms of therapy, or as I said, the kind of low tech, we call
Mm-hmm.
them, the boards with the pictures. We call them core vocabulary boards. They're kind of the main things that we use. We also will sometimes set up visual schedules for kids
Mm-hmm.
where they kind of know what's happening in their day to help them get accustomed to new routines. So sometimes we'll help kind of recommend, what should be in a visual display. But I would say the main tools would be those augmentative communication tools.
No, those sound really, really interesting.
I'm so sorry I didn't bring it.
That's okay. That's okay.
I had it. I wanted to show it to you, but maybe another time.
What's something you feel the education system could be doing better to support the communication development in children at an early age? Not necessarily kids who have speech and language disabilities, but kids in general.
Oh, that's a tough one. I do feel like there needs to be more speech and language pathologists and communicative disorders assistants in the school board.
Mm-hmm.
There's a small number of us, and we're spread across. So I usually have 6 to 8 schools that I'm responsible
Oh,
for,
wow.
and so there's limitations in terms of how many students I can help
Mm-hmm.
or support. And so I do think more staffing would be great. But I do think the kindergarten teachers, in particular, over the last couple of years, they have big numbers in their class,
Mm-hmm.
and they so there's usually a teacher, a classroom teacher, and a early childhood educator, and they can have 30 kids in their class, and it's just it's such a precious time when kids are developing so many of their skills, their social
Mm-hmm.
communication, their you know learning to interact with other kids, and then their speech, their language, their learning. And there's these two adults that are just often doing crowd control, right? Like they just don't have the time to spend with the kids to further anything. And so that's, I think, a big challenge. I think if there was a possibility to cap classroom numbers for kindergartens, that would make a
Mm-hmm.
really big difference for kids' speech and language development.
So the biggest thing for you is personnel.
Yeah, I would say, yeah. And just like I think the teachers are doing a wonderful job, but they don't have the time to get down at a child's level
Mm-hmm.
and listen to how they're talking and make sure they're understanding, because kids who are 4 still have some sounds that they're not using yet. So they sound a little bit different, and you do need to pay attention to how they're talking to you. And I don't think the teachers or the ECEs, the early childhood educators, often have the time to do that because of the volume of kids in their classroom.
And then they're overwhelmed as well.
Yeah, they really are. I think, yeah, it's a hard job. I give them a lot of credit.
No, for sure. I really I sympathize with that. Um, you know, kids with speech and language disabilities, but I think kids with disabilities in general, there's always these misconceptions about them. And with the children you deal with specifically, what would you say some of the biggest misconceptions are?
I think the biggest misconception is that there is a difference in intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So you always want to presume competence, even if a child seems like they're not listening or they're not understanding or they're, not necessarily following or can't communicate, are difficult to understand. You want to presume they're competent, presume that they have something to communicate, and try and help them to do that. And I think sometimes there's assumptions that, well, if a child is stuttering, then they have a lower
Mm-hmm.
intelligence, or if a child's speech sound different and they're difficult to understand, they have a lower intelligence, and that's not the case.
I meant to ask you this question earlier, but has there been a student success story? Obviously, without mentioning any names, has there been a student success story that has really stayed with you?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like there's been a lot of
Mm-hmm.
success stories. I feel like when I was working with preschools, I did help a lot of kids to no longer stutter.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very wonderful to see, right? Because it can be quite a stigma that carries with a person if they continue to stutter beyond being a preschooler and
Mm-hmm.
into the school age years. So that's definitely one where when I've helped a child with their fluency, I've been very happy, and I felt very good about that. And then in the school, we have an expert on our team in communication, in augmentative communication. She's our communicative disorders assistant. So for those of you who don't know, there is another really great role in speech language pathology, and there are CDAs that work with us. So communicative disorders assistants do the same work as speech language pathologists. They're just not trained to do assessment. And so on our team at the board, we have an excellent CDA. Her name is Donna Adams, and she is our AAC specialist. And she does a lot of training for staff with augmentative communication devices. And so I think the most amazing thing for me to have seen over the last couple of years at the board is her working with the educational assistants and students and showing them how to use their communication devices
Mm-hmm.
to communicate. So you will see kids who are completely nonverbal or have very few words,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, tell you a number of messages with their
Wow.
communication device following some time working with Donna or some of my other coworkers or myself. But she really, when she has some time to kind of show the adults that are working with the students and show the students kind of all the power that these devices have, it's just amazing to see what messages they have, because you wouldn't know all that they had to say because physically they just can't speak those words or communicate those ideas,
Hmm.
but they can through the device. So that's been pretty amazing to watch.
Wow, that's amazing. We might have to have her on too
Oh,
as
maybe
a
virtually.
follow-up.
She doesn't live close by, but I'm sure she would be happy to impart all of her wonderful knowledge.
So, COVID-19, that was a tough time for everyone, but especially kids with speech and language disabilities, be due to the communication barriers. In your experience, how did COVID-19 and in general the shift to online learning affect children with speech and language challenges?
Well, I think kind of during the pandemic, the kids who were already presenting with difficulties, they weren't able to have therapy.
Mm-hmm.
So we were at Grandview, we were doing therapy virtually, like through a screen. So there were a lot of limitations, right? You have a 4-year-old or a 3.5-year-old on the other side of the screen at their house, and they're running back and forth, and you're trying to engage them, and the parent is thinking about the work that they should be doing
Mm-hmm.
online when they're in a session with you. And so it was really very a band-aid kind of effect. And so a lot of those kids who were aged, 2, 3, 4 during the height of the pandemic just didn't get the opportunity to come to Grandview and have therapy. We did open relatively quickly, like within 3 months, but there were a lot of limitations on what we could do even in our in-person sessions. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do feel like there was a kind of halt to progress for those kids.
Yeah, slower development.
Yeah, and then there was also just a shift. Like there were so many really wonderful things in terms of technology that came out of the pandemic, right? Like so many, just in terms of being able to teach virtually, to see clients virtually, all of these things kind of came about. But technology isn't necessarily all good. And so what we found in general is it's not necessarily COVID-19, but it's just technology in general has really made a shift in how kids are developing their speech and language skills. They are very screen focused. They've been getting screen like kind of access to screens at a very young age. And their parents are also often on their phones. And it's nothing, I don't mean to sound negative for this kind of generation of
Mm-hmm.
parents, but it's just the nature of our society moving towards technology. And so you have kids who need to learn how to engage with another person, and they're looking at a screen, or
Mm-hmm.
their parents are looking at a screen. And there isn't a lot of that early social communication development that you have with a parent and child, where you're making funny faces at each other, you're tickling, you're talking, you're labeling things over and over and over again because of these screens that are there. And I'm not saying that's happening kind of across the
Mm-hmm.
board, but I do see a trend for sure. We see a lot of kids in junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten who are really impatient. They are used to swiping.
Yeah.
They're very good at getting to whatever screen they need to get to see whatever they want to see, and they have a hard time waiting. And so they get into the classroom setting and they have to wait in a line, or they have to wait their turn, or they don't have that immediate kind of response that they get from technology, and they're frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do feel like technology has really been very, I don't know, impactful, not necessarily in a good way for kids' communication development.
What would your message be to the parents out there?
Just, put down your phone, take your child's screen away. They're going to learn so much more from talking to you and hearing you talk than
Mm-hmm.
from looking at pictures on an iPad and hearing somebody else say the words. It's not just about the words that you're using, it's about that interaction together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on the topic of technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially in this day and age, AI. AI is, one of the hot topics. It's that buzzword. everybody clings on to. Looking ahead, how do you see artificial intelligence shaping children's communication development?
Well, I I don't know. I haven't really thought about it too much. It was funny. I was talking with my husband about this last night on the drive up because I it's something where it's there, right? AI is there, but I'm a
Mm-hmm.
little bit wary of it. Like I said, I'm just worried that the piece about AI that I know about, and maybe I'm thinking small scale, is that if parents are going to AI and speaking in their phone and saying, my 2-year-old isn't talking, and then AI comes up with information, where is that information coming from? Is that information accurate? And how is it going to guide that parent as to what steps to do next to help their child?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the thing that I thought of first, like, go to a speech pathologist, find a speech pathologist, go to your family doctor, talk to a person,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know where that information is being gleaned from. And you wouldn't want to just rely on some program on your phone determining whether or not your child needs help to develop their communication skills.
Is there any ways that you leverage AI in your work?
It's interesting. Our board has just like found a program that they would like us to use if we want to use AI.
Mm-hmm.
I have some coworkers who will sometimes not generate reports, but generate wording for the reports that we write
Mm-hmm.
using AI. Sometimes we will, if there's something we're wondering about that we haven't come across before or don't have a lot of information about, we might start our search with that and
Mm-hmm.
then look into things further. But I haven't really used it too much, to be honest. I worry myself about like the limitations, not limitations, but I just feel like I want to force myself to write my own reports. I want to force myself to continue to use my mind to, think of ideas and think about how I want to describe something. And I'm worried if I rely on AI that I will lose that. And so that's just a personal thing for
Mm-hmm.
me. But maybe I'm not seeing the big picture around it.
Yeah, no, well, I feel like there is a benefit in that. I feel like you're doing more of a personal assessment, not using artificial intelligence, but yes, for any type of writing, AI can help for sure. Okay, Teresa, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your journey. Your insights into speech and language pathology are not only inspiring, but are also a reminder of the power and importance of communication.
Thanks so much for having me.
No, it's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute pleasure having you today. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Health Talks podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow us on Instagram at the Health Talks Pod and share this episode with anyone who's passionate about science and healthcare. Until next time, stay curious.